On ancient maps at the foot of the Caucasus, you can find a strange name, Albania. But don't confuse it with the Albania in Europe. This Albania was located between the Caspian Sea and the Caucasus, on the lands of present-day Azerbaijan and the south of Dagestan. It was known by the Greeks, Romans, Persians, and Arabs. Its armies fought under the banners of Darius and Shapur, and its kings argued with Rome, traded with the Sassanids, and were baptized together with the Armenians. On this relatively small patch of land, Hellenism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and Islam clashed. And today you will hear the story of this ancient country that existed between Rome and Persia. It survived the invasions of the Huns and Arabs, and yet left its mark in stones, inscriptions, and the memory of the peoples of the Caucasus. Let me remind you, you're on the Amazing History channel, where we bring forgotten civilizations back to life, those that are barely mentioned in textbooks. If you're interested in what the Caucasus looked like 2,000 years ago, support this video with a like and a comment. This helps the channel grow and release more stories. And of course, a huge thank you to our sponsors. It's thanks to your support that we can create videos like this. Thank you for staying with us. Now let's get to the topic of this episode. For the Greeks, the Caucasus was not just mountains on a map, but the edge of the world, where Prometheus was chained, where the Argonauts searched for the Golden Fleece, and where the Amazons lived. In ancient texts, this place was described as harsh, rich, and almost mythical, where legends and geography merge into a single horizon. It was here, between the mountains and the Caspian Sea, that another Albania, the Caucasian Albania, emerged. It was first mentioned at the end of the first millennium by the Greeks and Romans. These were the Albans, one of the many mountain tribes in the northeast of the Caucasus. Their name did not yet refer to a specific state, but it already stood out as a distinct region of land between the Kura and Arax rivers, stretching all the way to the Caspian coast and Derbent. At that time, Albania did not have clear borders. The northern tribes roamed at the foot of the mountains, while the southern ones cultivated the valleys. Some lived by war, others by trade, and children guarded the mountain passes through which foreign armies entered the Caucasus. They spoke many languages, worshipped various gods, built clay and stone houses, and wore hides and metals. And yet, over time, these peoples began to unite, first under a common name, and then under the rule of a single king. Thus, from scattered tribes on the edge of the ancient world, a state emerged, one that would soon be spoken of by Strabon, Pliny, and Roman generals as the northern tribes. When, in the mid-4th century before Christ, when Alexander Macedonsky moved east, Caucasian Albania already existed, not yet as a centralized state, but as an established land with its own chiefs and tribes. Before that, it was under the strong influence of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. The Persians effectively governed outlying regions by preserving local customs, appointing satraps, collecting taxes, and recruiting warriors. Albania seemingly followed this model, officially free, yet subject to Persian authority. When Alexander invaded Asia, the Albans were drawn into events that seemed distant but reached their mountains. In the Battle of Gaugamela, where Darius III tried to stop the Macedonians, detachments from the northern lands fought, including the Albans, under the command of satrap Atropates. Their participation is not just a detail in the chronicle, it is the first time the Albans appear in history as a real force standing on the side of the great empire. After Darius's defeat, Achaemenid power collapses, and the Caucasus experiences being at the crossroads of empires for the first time. Yesterday, tribute was collected here for the Persians. Today, the Hellenistic kingdoms focus on this place. Archaeologists note that even in the architecture of that time, Albania was not isolated. The layout of settlements, burial mounds, and ornaments all resemble Persian models, but with local accents. After Alexander's campaigns, a new wind swept across the east. Hellenistic rulers replaced Persian officials, and in this world, Albania no longer seemed like a remote corner. It became a crossroads of civilizations: Persian discipline, Greek legends, barbarian strength, and Caucasian endurance. When, in the middle of the 1st century before Christ, Rome finally broke the resistance of Mithridates of Pontus, the general Gnaeus Pompeius moved further toward the Caucasus itself. This was no longer a campaign for glory, but an effort to control the entire East. At the end of 66 before Christ, his legions reached the Kura River, which marked the border between Armenia and Albania. Pompey stationed his troops for the winter, not expecting any serious trouble. But the Albanian king, Arois, did not wait for the foreign army to go on the offensive. He gathered his army, tens of thousands of infantry and about 12,000 cavalry, and suddenly attacked the Roman camps. The attack was bold but disorganized. Roman discipline prevailed, forcing the Albanians back across the river. For Pompey, this was a signal. In the spring of the following year, he launched his own offensive, crossed the Kura River, and invaded Albania. The battle resulted in the total defeat of the Albanian army. Seeing resistance was futile, Arois sent envoys to Pompey with gifts, hostages, and a letter requesting forgiveness and peace. Thus, Albania acknowledged its dependence on Rome for the first time, not as a conquered province, but as a subordinate ally permitted to keep its throne and name. Pompey, satisfied with his victory, accepted the offering and granted peace to the Albanians. For him, it was another triumph. For the Albanians, it was their first encounter with the Western Empire, which would remember the Caucasus more than once in the future. The clash with Rome became the first serious test for the young state. It also showed that Albania was no longer just tribes. It now had a king, army, capital, and borders. The Romans described it as fertile and rich, but considered it harsh, with people more used to freedom than order. Strabo, writing slightly later, vividly describes the Albanians as able to field 60,000 infantry and 22,000 cavalry. Those numbers are impressive even for Rome. They lived simply, bartered goods and metals, grew some grain, and were renowned for their archers and warriors. Each tribe had its own language, and recently they united under the rule of a single king. Gradually, cities began to appear in Albania. Pliny mentions Kabalaka as the capital, and later Ptolemy will list almost 30 cities, though many of them are known to us only by name. But archaeologists have found remains of streets, stone buildings, and defensive walls. It was no longer a land of nomads, but a place where a unique culture was emerging. For Rome, Albania became a kind of distant outpost, a symbol of how far the power of the empire could reach. In the 1st century AD, Albania was officially an ally of Rome, but kept its own dynasty and independence. A silent witness reminds us of the Roman presence. A stone inscription in Gabustan, not far from present-day Baku, has Latin letters carved on it and the name of a centurion of the 12th Legion, who served under Emperor Domitian. But the farther from the Mediterranean Sea, the weaker the influence of the eagles became beyond the mountains. A new power, Parthia, was growing stronger in Mesopotamia, and it was the Parthians, not the Romans, who became Albania's closest neighbors. Parthian influence affected all aspects: trade, coins, and court customs. The South Caucasus was part of their cultural world, and gradually the power of the Sassanid dynasty, which ruled in Persia, spread to the Caucasus as well. First Armenia, then Iberia, and soon Albania came to be ruled by branches of the same family. This was a typical Eastern compromise. The local kings kept their thrones, but were formally subordinate to the great king of kings. Thus, Albania received its own Arsacid dynasty with Persian blood, but with a Caucasian character. This was a time of relative balance. Albania was developing, building cities, trading, conducting affairs with its neighbors, but remained under constant pressure from the great powers. Rome and Parthia clashed in Mesopotamia, and the wave of their confrontation inevitably reached the Caucasus. Each new treaty between them caused someone in the north, Armenia, Iberia, or Albania, to switch sides again. For local kings, survival was a constant game. Today, you're an ally of Rome, tomorrow a vassal of Persia, and the day after that, you're advised to stay neutral until new troops arrive. In the 3rd century, a new power rose over Persia, the Sassanids. They overthrew the Ashakids and began to rebuild the country from scratch. Now under the sign of Zoroastrianism and strict centralization. Shapur. I didn't waste time on negotiations. His armies marched through Armenia, Iberia, and Albania, subduing the entire Caucasus. Albania was no longer an ally, but a province within the vast empire. Thus began a new era. The Albanian rulers returned and still held the royal title, but their power now depended on the will of the Shahanshah. Every step, every diplomatic mission, every dynastic marriage went through Ctesiphon. But in return, the Sassanids provided protection from northern nomads and gave access to trade routes. Some saw it as losing independence, but for the Albans, it was a chance to survive. The Romans, however, did not accept this between Rome and Persia. At the end of the 3rd century, they launched another offensive, and after Emperor Galerius defeated Shapur II, they signed the Treaty of Nisibis. Armenia and Beria went to Rome. Albania remained under the Sassanids. In fact, it found itself on the border of worlds, and this border would determine its entire future fate. The 4th century was a turning point for Caucasian Albania, as empires kept dividing the world, now fighting with both the sword and faith. Rome placed its bet on a new religion. Under Constantine, Christianity stopped being persecuted and became the official faith of the empire. And a little later, Armenia was the first in the east to declare itself a Christian kingdom, and from there the new faith began to slowly spread northward. At first, Christianity arrived quietly. It didn't push out the old customs, but simply existed alongside them, in homes where people still lit fires in honor of the fire gods. However, as Armenia and its missionaries gained influence, Albania developed its own preachers, communities, and temples. Legend says that King Urnayr, a descendant of the Arsacids, went to Armenia himself to be baptized by Saint Grigor the Illuminator. This step was decisive. From the end of the 4th century, Christianity became the official religion of the Albanian kings. Along with the cross came new scripts, stone churches, and a unique form of art where Eastern ornaments intertwined with Christian symbols. But the new faith also meant a new danger: the Sassanids. The rulers of Persia saw Christianity as a political threat far too closely. It connected the Caucasus with Rome, and the Shahanshahs feared that their subjects would listen not to the king, but to the bishop, and not to Ctesiphon, but to Constantinople. Thus, religion became a weapon. While Rome supported their brothers in faith, Persia tried to restore the old religion, Zoroastrianism, the worship of fire and celestial forces. The conflict flared up during the reign of King Vacha and his successors. The Albanian rulers tried to stay between two worlds, to be baptized so as not to fall behind Armenia, but also not to irritate Persia too much. Some princes sincerely embraced the new faith, while others did so only for political reasons. Entire regions pressured by the Shahanshah or priests often switched back to Zoroastrianism, with each generation repeatedly being baptized, renouncing it, and then returning to Christianity. In the mid-5th century, the Sassanids aimed to end these shifting loyalties. Shahanshah Yezdegerd II ordered all Christians in the empire to convert to Zoroastrianism, prompting an uprising by Armenians, Iberians, and Albans. In 451, a decisive battle took place on the plain of Avarayr. The Christian forces were defeated, but their faith survived. After the defeat, King Vacha II was forced to formally accept Zoroastrianism in order to save the country from destruction. But when the new Shahanshah Peroza came to power, Vacha switched sides again, returned to Christianity, and even opened a passage for the northern tribes to strike at the Persians. The response was harsh. The Persian army burned cities, and the White Huns poured into the country through the Daril Gorge. For 3 years, Albania lay in ruins until peace was finally made. After the peace, Vacha kept the throne but gave up power and retired into seclusion. When the smoke of war settled and Albania recovered from devastation, a new ruler, Pachagan, who would later be called the Pious, ascended the throne. He was the nephew of Vash II and inherited a country where faith, power, and fear had long been intertwined. For almost a century, the people lived between the cross and the fiery altar, and Pachagan decided that it was time to put an end to it. Historians describe him as a deeply religious and at the same time resolute man. He didn't just profess Christianity, he tried to cleanse it of everything that had accumulated over years of compromise. During his reign, reforms began in Albania. He expelled Zoroastrian priests, restored destroyed churches, reinstated exiled priests, and banned secret human sacrifices and pagan rituals in the mountains. His name is associated with the council in Aguen, one of the key events in the history of the local church. At this council, decrees were adopted that established the structure and rights of the Albanian Christian church. In fact, it was at that time that it became independent, no longer just a branch of the Armenian church, but a separate church with its own spiritual hierarchy. Vachagan supported education, the construction of churches, and the copying of books. In the Chronicles, he is called not only a king, but also a teacher and mentor of the people. During this brief time, Albania stopped being just a battlefield and became a spiritual center in the Caucasus for the first time in years. But Vashigan's power was fragile. The Sassanids still considered the Caucasus their territory, and although Shahanshah Balash was more tolerant toward Christians, Albania's dependence on Persia did not disappear. Any weakening of the center in Ctesiphon gave a chance for independence, but as soon as the Shah regained strength, control returned. Vashigan balanced between submission and autonomy, trying not to arouse suspicion while at the same time strengthening the country from within. Almost nothing is known about his last years. According to some versions, he died a natural death. According to others, he was killed during a rebellion with Nati. One way or another, with his departure, the line of Arsacid kings of Albania came to an end, the very same dynasty that once ruled in Armenia and Iberia. When the Arsacid dynasty ended, power in the country passed to those who were closer to the Shahanshah, to Persian appointees and governors, who were called Marzbans. Albania was formerly a kingdom, but the king held only a title, with real power in the hands of the Sasanian representative. The Marzban ruled for the Shah, collecting taxes, leading the army, and overseeing church affairs. His residence was in the city of Partav, which was once restored by Vachagan and turned into the capital. Partav became an important hub on the trade route between Iran and the Caucasus. But the richer the city became, the stronger its dependence on Persia grew. The Sassanids were initially tolerant of Christians, but their policy shifted after their defeat by Byzantium. The Shahanshahs saw Christians as potential allies, enemies, people whose faith connected them not with Persia, but with Rome. New restrictions began, and the church once again came under pressure. Some of the nobility compromised, but the clergy resisted, maintaining their influence among the mountain tribes. Thus, Albania turned into a country where power and faith once again went in different directions. Meanwhile, another player appeared on the northern borders. The Khazars, nomads from the Caspian steppes, sometimes invaded Transcaucasian lands, demanded tribute, and formed temporary alliances with Byzantium or Persia. For them, Albania was just a thoroughfare. Each such raid left behind fires and new ruins. Without a strong center, the Albanian nobility sought protection from anyone to survive. Meanwhile, Byzantium watched all of this from the sidelines. Constantinople's emperors viewed the Caucasus as a natural eastern barrier, occasionally sending or receiving envoys. In 575, an Albanian delegation even arrived to see Emperor Justin II with a request to accept them under Byzantine protection, but the request went unanswered. The emperor advised them to remain loyal to the Shah because Byzantium did not want an open war with Persia. For Albania, this was a cold shower. Neither the West nor the East intended to save her. The country became a kind of buffer between the empires, through which armies passed, but where no one stayed for long. By the mid-7th century, the Caucasus was again undergoing change. The Sassanid state was collapsing, Arabs advanced from the south, Khazars from the north, and internal uprisings grew more frequent. Albania, as usual, was caught between them. Power had long belonged to the Marzbans, but each was backed by local nobility eager to exploit central weakness. A figure emerges who is unrelated to the army or throne. Catholicos Vira, the head of the Albanian church, was one of those spiritual leaders who knew how to act not with the sword, but with words and diplomacy. When the Shahanshah summoned him to Ctesiphon, Vira spent 25 years there, essentially as an honorary prisoner, but during that time he managed to earn the trust of the Persian court. He understood the language, customs, and could address those in power without humiliating himself or his country. When the Khazars invaded the Caucasus in the 620s and reached Albania, it was Vira who was sent to them as a mediator. The chronicles report he persuaded leaders to spare the temples and cities, a rare instance where spiritual authority outweighed military power. After the Sassanids regained control, Vira returned home as a man of great authority, and it was he who played a decisive role in the emergence of the new Mihranid dynasty. These people came from the ancient Persian city of Mihran, one of the 7 noble houses of Iran. One of the members of the family, Varas Grigor, was married to the daughter of the Shahanshah and enjoyed his favor. At Catholicos Vir's initiative, Varas Grigor was given the title of ruler of Albania. Officially, it was an appointment from Ctesiphon, but it was actually the restoration of a national dynasty with Persian roots. The new dynasty balanced faith and loyalty, maintaining Christianity without severing ties to Persia. Their precarious position ultimately saved them. While their neighbors were at war, Albania survived thanks to its flexibility and caution. After the death of Varas Grigor, power passed to his son Javanshir, who was raised at the Persian court. Javanshir grew up in the atmosphere of intrigue and conspiracies of Ctesiphon, and he knew how to be both a diplomat and a warrior. He led Albanian units in the Sassanid army and fought Arabs at Qadisiyah and during the siege of the Persian capital. But when the Sassanid Empire collapsed, Javanshir realized that the old world was gone. He returned to Albania as an independent ruler, trying to save the country from chaos. To hold on to power, Javanshir sought support from two powers at once. From Byzantium, he gained the honorary title of Patrikeos, authority confirmation, and hopes for an alliance. From the Caliphate, he was promised safety if he remained loyal. He chose caution, recognized the sovereignty of the Arabs, but kept internal autonomy and his own army. For several years, Albania lived in a rare peace for itself between Damascus and Constantinople, becoming an enemy to neither of them. But old contradictions did not disappear. The nobility, used to shifting patrons, resisted strong rule. Meanwhile, the Arabs increased pressure for submission, and the Khazars again threatened from the north. Around the 680s, Javanshir was killed. Some sources say by his own nobility's conspiracy, others by Persian mercenaries. With his death, the last figure disappeared who could still speak on behalf of Caucasian Albania as an independent country. After that, Albania became part of the Arab Caliphate, merging into one province with Armenia. The Christian nobility converted to Islam or retreated to the mountains, where churches and monasteries survived in isolation. Gradually, the very name Albania disappeared from the chronicles, giving way to the name Aran, but the legacy of the Marinids and their ruler Javanshir remained. As the last attempt to maintain a balance between East and West, the history of Caucasian Albania came to an end, a country that is rarely remembered, but without which it is impossible to understand the history of the entire Caucasus. Thank you for watching until the end. If you're interested in how the forgotten peoples of the ancient world lived and what inspired them, subscribe. There are many more stories ahead. See you all.